This is Land of Havilah, Isaiah 8. In chapter 7, Yahweh commanded Isaiah to deliver a prophecy to King Ahaz about an impending Assyrian invasion, which wasn't even on the horizon at the time. Now Yahweh's commanding Isaiah to go public with it. Verse 1. Yahweh said to me, "Take a large tablet and write on it with a man's pen for Maher-shalal-Hashbaz, and I'll take for myself faithful witnesses to testify, Uriah the priest and Zechariah the son of Jeberechiah. I went to the prophetess, and she conceived and bore a son. Then Yahweh said to me, Call his name Maher-shalal-Hashbaz, for before the child knows how to say my father and my mother, the riches of Damascus and the plunder of Samaria will be carried away by the king of Assyria." Comment: in the last chapter, Isaiah prophesied to King Ahaz that the Assyrian Empire would sweep in and depopulate Syria and Israel, and for Judah it would be a close shave. In verses 1 to 4 we just read, Yahweh commanded Isaiah to deliver the same prophecy to a wider audience. The delivery of the prophecy was to be as Yahweh commanded in verse 1, that Isaiah should take a large tablet and write on it with an ordinary pen, Maher-shalal-Hashbaz, which in translation is, "Make haste to plunder, hurry to the spoil." When we unravel that, it turns out that those words are a command to the Assyrian king that he should make haste to sweep in and plunder Syria and Israel. The prophecy won't actually be delivered to the Assyrian king as such. Nevertheless, Yahweh is inspiring him to attack. In verse 2, Yahweh told Isaiah he wanted two men in particular to witness what was on the tablet, apparently so that after the prophecy comes to pass, the witnesses will be able to back Isaiah up that indeed he was the one who wrote it, and the witnesses will be able to confirm when he wrote it. In verse 3, as a second very strong proof of the prophecy, Isaiah fathered a child at about the same time. Yahweh commanded him to name the boy Maher-shalal-Hashbaz, which is the same as what was on the tablet. As the child grows, it'll be obvious how old he is, and his name will be obvious, so he'll serve as a second proof of what the prophecy was and of when Isaiah received it. In verse 4, Yahweh says, by the time the child is old enough to say Mama and Dada, the riches of Damascus and plunder of Samaria will be carried away by the king of Assyria. So the plundering will come to pass by the time the boy says his first few words. Verse 5, Yahweh spoke to me yet again, saying, Because this people have refused the waters of Shiloah that go softly, and rejoice in Rezin and Remaliah's son, now therefore, behold, the Lord brings upon them the mighty flood waters of the river, the king of Assyria and all his glory. It'll come up over all its channels and go over all its banks. It'll sweep onward into Judah. It'll overflow and pass through. It'll reach even to the neck, and the stretching out of its wings will fill the width of your land, Emmanuel. Make an uproar, you peoples, and be broken in pieces. Listen, all you from far countries. Dress for battle and be shattered. Dress for battle and be shattered. Take counsel together, and it'll be brought to nothing. Speak the word, and it will not stand, for God is with us. Comment in verses 5 to 10, Yahweh spoke to Isaiah again about Syria, Israel, and Judah, about the Assyrian Empire sweeping in on them. In verse 6, Syria, Israel, and Judah refused the waters of Shiloah that go softly, meaning they refused the peace available in Yahweh, a peace that would have been for them like gently flowing waters, a thing of pleasure and delight. Instead of rejoicing in Yahweh, the Syrians rejoiced in their king Rezin, and the Israelites rejoiced in their king Pekah, son of Remaliah. Since they chose those two scoundrels over Yahweh, there'll be no peaceful waters for them. In verse 7, they'll have instead a mighty flood of waters from the river, meaning the Euphrates River, which is home base of the Assyrian Empire. The Assyrians will come in as if the Euphrates is overflowing, like a torrential flood. In verse 8, that flood won't stop in Syria or Israel. It'll keep flowing south to Judah and pass on through, even up to the neck in Judah, filling the width of the land. Let's notice in the case of Judah, it won't completely ruin them. It'll only be up to the neck. Just as Yahweh said in the last chapter, it'll be a close shave for them. They'll be shaved head to foot. In verse 8, it'll fill the width of your land, Emmanuel. So the land belongs to Emmanuel, which is the Messiah. Yahweh still claiming the land as his own, since he claims it for the Messiah. He's not disowning Judah, though he's bringing this terrible flood. And in verse 9, quote, "Make an uproar, you peoples, and be broken in pieces. Listen, all you far countries, dress for battle and be shattered. Take counsel together, and it'll be brought to nothing. Speak the word, and it will not stand, for God is with us," end quote. By way of interpretation, the far countries are the small kingdoms, names not given here, but some of the names are given in 2 Kings 18:33-35. They're kingdoms which stand in the path of the Assyrians. As the Assyrians sweep through the Middle East, they'll gobble up all these kingdoms. Each kingdom will take counsel together, trying to ally themselves with each other to repel the Assyrians, but to no avail. They'll be shattered. Their counsel and alliances together will be brought to nothing. They'll dress for battle but be broken in pieces. They'll speak the word to themselves that, hey, we're going to resist, but that word will not stand because God is with the Assyrians. The Assyrian flood will overcome them all the way to Syria, Israel, and Judah. Now Yahweh has a personal word for Isaiah, verse 11. "For Yahweh spoke thus to me with a strong hand and instructed me not to walk in the way of this people, saying, Don't say a conspiracy concerning all about which this people say, a conspiracy, neither fear their threats nor be terrorized. Yahweh of armies is who you must respect as holy. He's the one you must fear. He's the one you must dread. He'll be a sanctuary, but for both houses of Israel he'll be a stumbling stone and a rock that makes them fall. For the people of Jerusalem he'll be a trap and a snare. Many will stumble over it, fall, be broken, be snared, and be captured. Wrap up the testimony. Seal the law among my disciples." Comment verses 11-16, Yahweh instructed Isaiah how to handle himself concerning this prophecy of Assyrian invasion and the blowback he'll get from it. The people will accuse him of conspiracy in verse 12, that somehow by predicting it, he was party to making it happen, as if maybe he's praying and wishing for it to happen. They'll blame the messenger, in other words, and they'll threaten him. But in verse 12, Yahweh says, don't fear their threats or be terrorized by them. In verse 13, it's Yahweh you must fear, dread, and respect as holy. Don't fear your fellow countrymen. In verse 14, Yahweh will be Isaiah's sanctuary and the sanctuary of anyone else who takes refuge in him. But for both houses of Israel, meaning the northern and southern kingdoms, Israel and Judah, Yahweh will be a stumbling stone and a rock that makes them fall, and a trap and a snare for the people of Jerusalem. According to those metaphors, it's not that a stone jumps out in the path and causes anyone to stumble, or that a person must necessarily fall into a trap or snare, but that Yahweh will remain immovable, and if they trip over him, they trip. If they ignore him, it's to their own destruction. In verse 16, Yahweh says, wrap up the testimony, seal the law among my disciples. In other words, that's the prophecy, Isaiah. Write it down, deliver it, release it to the nation. Anyone who's my disciple will pay attention to it. Coming up, Isaiah's personal reaction to all this. The house of Jacob in the next verse is the house of Israel, which is Judah and Israel together. Isaiah says, verse 17, I'll wait for Yahweh who hides his face from the house of Jacob, and I'll look for him. Behold, I and the children whom Yahweh has given me are for signs and for wonders in Israel, from Yahweh of armies, who dwells in Mount Zion. Comment, Isaiah says, I'll wait for Yahweh who hides his face from Israel and Judah. Behold, God has given me and my children for signs and wonders. He's talking about the boy he'll name Swift to the Booty and Speedy to the Prey. Isaiah and the boy are signs and wonders to the people from God. Isaiah goes on, verse 19, When they tell you, consult with those who have familiar spirits and with the wizards who chirp and who mutter, shouldn't a people consult with their God? Should they consult the dead on behalf of the living? Turn to the law and to the testimony. If they don't speak according to this word, surely there's no mourning for them. They'll pass through it very distressed and hungry, and it will happen that when they're hungry, they'll worry and curse by their king and by their God. They'll turn their faces upward and look to the earth and see distress, darkness, and the gloom of anguish. They'll be driven into thick darkness. Comment in verses 19-22, the people consult with familiar spirits and with wizards who chirp and mutter, meaning they turn to the occult for prophecy, to wizards who do strange rituals and communicate with the spirits and the dead in strange voices. That's their idea of spiritual counsel. But in verse 19, Isaiah says, shouldn't a people consult with their God? In verse 20, shouldn't they turn to the law of God if they want to know what to do? They should just do the law. If they don't speak according to God's word, there's no morning for them, meaning no rising of the sun, no dawning of light on them. In verse 21, the people of Judah will pass through this event, but in distress and hunger. They'll curse by the name of the king and of God. They'll turn their faces upward in prayer, but in verse 22, apparently they won't do what it takes to get through to God because they'll look around them and see what's happening on the earth, that it's a time of distress, thick darkness, and gloom of anguish. So again, Isaiah has the responsibility of delivering this word, but there'll be a negative reaction to it. He'll be blamed and persecuted on account of this Assyrian invasion. That's the chapter. Now as a testimony from your narrator to the listener, I read this chapter last night, and it was gobbledygook, but as I have so many times, I prayed for interpretation, and today I was able to sit down with it and put it together with the history of 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles and get the sense of it. So glory to God, He does that for me day in and day out. Isaiah 9 is next.